Also, a raft of legal reforms outlined in the Accelerating Infrastructure Report and Action Plan aim to bring a new culture to Irish planning. But can these 30 measures cut red tape and reset the imbalance between individuals' rights to object and the delivery of major public infrastructure? There'll also be some of this.
Well, you don't have a prudent Pascal, but you have a sensible Simon.
Right. I'm joined by Fianna Fáil Senator Dee Ryan, Assistant Professor at the School of Architecture, Planning and Environmental Policy at University College Dublin, Orla Hegarty, and political correspondent with the Irish Examiner, Louise Byrne. I'm also joined online by CEO and Chairman of the O'Flynn Group, Michael O'Flynn. And you can send us your comments, simply scan the QR code or contact us via the WhatsApp number. Louise Byrne, it's been a year in the making. So what have we got today that's going to accelerate infrastructure?
Well, the much anticipated, much spoken about and much trailed, I have to say. I think we already knew a fair amount of this plan before Jack Chambers, the Taoiseach, the Taoiseach, lined out on the steps of government buildings this morning to outline it. And essentially what they're saying is that infrastructure is taking too long to build. So there needs to be measures put in place by the government to fix that. Now, a lot of this is actually focused on the idea of judicial reviews, and what the government is arguing and what Simon Harris said at that press conference this morning is that you have serial objectors and they're objecting to everything and they're holding stuff up. So what the government is planning to do is reforming that judicial review system, and they're doing things like changing when you can oppose a development rather than being able to do it at every stage of the development, only being able to do it in the final stages. They're also looking at introducing, in the case of environmental judicial reviews, putting in a cap to kind of cut the cost to the state of these judicial reviews. Now, I think the interesting part of this is how quickly is this going to be implemented? Because Minister Chambers said this morning that, you know, they would not be surprised, the government would not be surprised if there ends up being objections to the objection, you know, overhaul.
Countdown, yeah.
Yeah, it's like Inception. But so this is the question. Does this plan, does it hit a roadblock before it even is implemented? Does it end up in the courts? Does it end up being, you know, even rates higher than that? So when is this actually going to be implemented? How much money is going to be spent on defending this? I think the other interesting thing that they're doing, and this is not, you know, not everything that was announced today is going to be implemented immediately. But the other thing that they're looking at putting in place is giving themselves emergency powers so that they can speed up critical infrastructure projects in emergency and also force major projects through the planning process before, without going through the regular steps. So it'll be very interesting if it works, but I think there is an acceptance that it could hit roadblocks, and I think no one can deny that we need infrastructure, we need water, we need energy, we need to improve the grid to ensure that homes can be built. It's just a matter of how quickly this can all be put in place. OK, so Dee Ryan, you're going to limit the public's ability to voice legitimate concerns about projects that are in the planning system?
Not at all, not at all. Today is a really important day for us. It's a significant milestone in our work to deliver on the programme for government. We've committed 270 billion in the National Development Plan over the coming years, and today's Accelerating Infrastructural Task Force report and the action plan, very importantly, that comes with it, that sets out the actions that need to be taken, the government bodies, the departments responsible for taking them, and the timeline for when it's going to be delivered, will mean that we'll be making the changes and the reforms to the bureaucracy and the processes for approving serious, significant infrastructural projects to allow us to get those projects done.
A lot of which is on government side, state agencies, independent bodies and so on and so forth, which is all paid for by the taxpayer, nothing to do with objectors outside. So that's just red tape that government can cut at any time.
Well, I think it was significant that when we went to the country last November and asked for a mandate to go back into government, that we highlighted that accelerating infrastructure was a critical objective for us. And so when Minister Chambers was put in charge of the department, he was given infrastructure as a significant division, a new division created for him within that. He set up the Accelerating Infrastructure Task Force of all of the most important and relevant stakeholders in the work that had to be done. And they did their work. They went out and consulted.
The fellas there for the previous 5 years are obviously doing nothing that they didn't notice. That
well, it's about... well, to be fair, you know, our regulations and our processes have built up significantly over time. And what this report is about is cutting through that for critical projects and prioritising those projects.
And the first item on the agenda is a court challenge, basically. So how long before what's announced today will actually be implemented?
Well, as you know, and I think this, for me, having previously participated in the government task force, people may, in the past, in other reports, have criticised that they issued recommendations and they were left on a shelf to get dusty. This report, the committee have been asked to stay on to oversee the implementation of it. It's not recommendations; they're actions.
Okay.
They're concrete and they're deliverable, and we have
Similar
timelines
to
for each of those.
Richard Bruton's action plan for jobs, there is a whole load of recommendations set out across a whole load of different agencies and departments, and they all have to be implemented over time.
Well, these are actions that will have to be implemented over time. Absolutely, but it's a very tight time frame. For example, there would be some recommendations coming into effect immediately in Q1 and others into early 2027.
Orla Hegarty, so people who take judicial reviews, they're the enemy of the state. They're the ones who are holding up all of these vital infrastructure projects, and they're the problem.
Well, so we're being told, and we've been told that for months now, but the evidence isn't there. And I think it would be helpful if the Minister and his department actually clarify the claims in the report, because they're saying that judicial reviews are up 30% this year, and the data isn't there to support that. So we'd like some clarity around that. And we've had these statements about these exponential rise in judicial review and the gold plating of regulations and the whole issue around people weaponising the courts. There's been very, very strong messaging around all of this that isn't borne out. If you speak to people who are in the sector and dealing with it, this is not what they diagnose as the problem.
So
and this seems to fundamentally
the
undermine rights. There's fundamental problems right across the board, from infrastructure spend to certainty about procurement to certainty about government funding. What's not mentioned in the report, I suppose, is that we had more than 10 years of austerity. You can't blame regulation for
there's
that.
a backlog. But
What's not mentioned is that we've had a fall off in residential construction and civil engineering activity for the last 5 or 6 months, which means, particularly in civil engineering, it's indicating that infrastructure spend is not being made. So there are fundamental problems across the board, and this is focusing in on undermining
it's
rights.
not just about judicial reviews, though. Is there anything in this plan that you would look at and go, well, that will actually help to speed things up?
Well, I think it's very vague, in terms of regulation is the issue. And we've seen this messaging in a lot of places recently, almost as if a market isn't functioning, it has to be regulation. And that's a kind of ideological position. What isn't in this is to actually identify which regulations. There's a lot of things listed without any analysis. So the case studies that are given here say there was a delay and it took this long, but they don't actually itemise what was in the delay so that they could make proper strategic actions.
What's the problem then when they're saying a small wastewater treatment project in Ireland takes 7 to 10 years, an ESB project, fairly small substation, that can take 5 to 6 years, may even take eight and a half years. So fairly basic issues, like a major road project can take up to 15 years. They're basically saying that the time scale has pretty much doubled in the last 20 years for delivery of these. So what is the problem?
But where is the analysis? Like there are places where things are left sitting for several years. The Dublin drainage scheme was several years in Bordpanola because it had to be all reorganised. There's a whole series of reasons. There's often a delay in funding being approved. There's a delay in procurement processes that are not the most efficient. But without the analysis, this report jumps to conclusions that seem to be sort of predetermined conclusions, which is deregulate and remove access to the courts.
OK, Michael Flynn, you're happy to see, though, that this report has come out, is outlining what the government regards as the problem at hand, and they're setting out what they believe is necessary to do to address these delays.
Yeah, I absolutely welcome the report and congratulate the government for bringing this forward. And I'm really surprised with the last speaker's comments. But before I get to some of those, I mean, we are in a position here for a long number of years that everything we try to do takes us forever. We have a serious problem, not just with judicial reviews, but with the whole structure of actual deliverability. Everything goes back to the cost base, and everything is paid for by some person or other. And one of my core activities is house building, and a lot of it goes back to being added on to the house purchaser. But I'm astounded when I hear people saying we don't have a problem, we don't have enough data or analysis. Like, we all know what the problem is. And I think, to be fair to this group, and they're a very strong group, and they have done their research, and I've spent a good few hours today looking at this report. And I have to say, this is a seriously contemplated report. And of course we'll have pushback. But what we actually need now is how do we implement this? Not what is wrong with it, because the conclusions are absolutely there. The actions are there. I was involved in the Housing Commission and we had recommendations. I'm delighted that this group not only had the minister directly involved, but they have actions, because our recommendations really didn't go anywhere. But that's another story. And I have to say, the style of this report, the actions, the way they've set it out, and I like.
Are you convinced that this report is this report going to be implemented, though, Michael, from your reading of it?
Well, this is the key question. I mean, having a report like this is wonderful. And already we're hearing that the report itself, or the structure of a lot of it, will be judicially challenged. I mean, this is the mindset we have. And when I hear people like Orla speak, we don't have a serious issue here. Does she know that we have 5 times more judicial reviews than they do in the UK, which is a market I would be familiar with? I mean, does she understand the cost implications? A lot of these judicial reviews are opportunistic. A lot of them are, and I have experienced them, so I know what I'm talking about here. A lot of them are framed in such a way that you are going to lose because of time. Okay. We've had judicial reviews, which means that the planning actually expired before the decision could come back from Europe. So, like, we have to deal with serious issues that people have weaponized. And I've read that word. I think it's a fair word. I've seen them. I've experienced them. Okay. And I think this report
let's let Orla respond to that. So
I would just say that I accept that there are delays and there are blockages, and we have been a very long time doing projects. What I have disputed is the evidence for the conclusions in this report, which is that we need to remove access to the planning system and remove access to the courts and make them difficult.
I just want to put a point here that the Taoiseach made today. He said there's a handful of seal aerial objectors in the country holding up the country's progress. Does he have a point there, or would you dispute that?
Well, maybe he could name them.
Okay.
I suspect that, we've been hearing this narrative for months now, and we haven't got the evidence supporting it. And it is really surprising that the foundation of this report is that it is escalating when it's not.
Okay, we're basically referencing figures here. It seems there was some figures from the Fine Gael TD Colin Burke last week saying that 147 judicial reviews last year, 106 in the first half of this year. So are we standing over the figures here? I
can get the actual concrete figures for her, and I certainly will ensure that she gets that, but I was given the percentage increases, which is what's important from my perspective.
Okay, but Orla's point is that judicial reviews is not what you're making it out to be as the panacea to everything.
No, I would disagree fully, and I accept that the numbers you've just stated, it doesn't actually highlight the significance and the importance of that project. So a project that it could be judicially reviewed might be something as small as a one-off house scheme, or it could be a wastewater treatment plant, or it could be a significant grid investment, or it could be a block of apartments. So the number of judicial reviews, it doesn't actually outline the impact. And what's not spoken about and what's not obvious in those figures is the chilling effect that the uncertainty of a judicial review has on likely investment and into the progress of projects that are important to us.
Okay, another point raised in this report, as Louise went through, is this notion that you can fast-track certain projects. What is a project of strategic importance in the national interest?
So
if Michael O'Flynn is building 100 houses in Castletroy in Limerick, in your constituency, is that not a project of national interest in a housing crisis?
So what the report has said we will do is bring forward a critical infrastructure bill, which will define exactly what you're
So where's the line?
Outlining now. That has to be worked out and defined by the Attorney General and the Minister's officials, but we expect it to be around...
But surely everything can fit underneath that.
I'll answer you. We'd expect it to be around very specific key projects that are of critical importance to further development and achieving...
Michael O'Flynn, do you not believe that... OK, let me go to Michael O'Flynn now. Michael, do you not believe that what you're doing in building houses is actually in the national interest?
I have no question and no difficulty in saying to you it is. What's more important than the infrastructure of housing? I mean, food and shelter are the two most basic requirements. We have failed a generation of people. We have failed and continue to fail to deliver the housing. At this moment in time, we don't even have the right housing targets. And infrastructure is critical to delivering housing targets, even though I will contend we don't have the right targets. So I would say to you, Finan, yes, housing infrastructure, building houses is a critical infrastructure. You can get from A to B with difficulty, but you need a place to live.
Yeah.
And we are not supplying places to live.
And
I absolutely accept roads need to improve.
And if not the houses that you're building, Michael, well, then certainly the wastewater infrastructure for those houses, the roads getting to that area, presumably that can all come in under the idea of being in the national interest. That's why I'm interested in where do you draw the line here?
But it will be
Well,
defined.
We've had a year. This is the issue. You've had a year to define it. This department was set up in January. This plan has been worked on for years, and it's going to have to be a very fine line because, yes, while I think everyone accepts that things need to be done faster, people also want to ensure that things are done properly, that houses and infrastructure and all these things aren't just being thrown up, that due consideration is being given to the area around these places.
Or can you give me a definition of strategic importance in the national interest?
Well, it's clear in the report that it's about electricity, water and transport possibly. It's not about housing at some level. I think we should ask the question, is it about data centres actually? Because clearly there's a moratorium currently on data centres. There's enormous demand from the tech centre to expand. We can see what's happening internationally and we have to set this in an international context. President Trump had an executive order only a few months ago with very similar language about accelerating infrastructure, but it was said for data centres with all the same language about deregulation, removing judicial review. And we know the pressure is coming from the tech sector here. This talks about private wires, which is effectively private electricity installations. And we have to ask, is that some of what's driving
So this is a response to the tech bros like John Collison, another Limerick man?
The most pressing issue, Fiona, and I don't appreciate what I'm saying will be expected to be defined within the critical infrastructure bill, being characterised as, housing isn't important, it's not critical infrastructure. Of course it is. It's the number one issue in the country. And of course, everything that we're doing is with a view to accelerating delivery of housing for people across the country. The critical infrastructure bill, which hasn't been brought forward yet, Louise, will define specifically what those items are. And that's for the medium to long term. These are the big ticket projects that allow us to do transport-led development and all of the important planning.
But the question is,
and it will allow us to actually deliver.
We seem to be doing a bit of our... We seem to be doing a bit of Pol Pot here, that there was year zero started November of last year, and basically anything, like this has been coming about for years, and now suddenly we're catching up.
The specific bill that I'm talking about will require agencies of the state to prioritise. It will be for agencies of the state to prioritise.
They're not priorities
to prioritise projects that they're going to designate as critical infrastructure,
right. Because a lot of this report is about
If I may finish, they will be treated differently in the planning process.
Because a lot of this report is about basically the government doing its job, which is state agencies actually working together. There's talk in it about state agencies having to free up land. They don't own that land. We own that land as the people of Ireland. Why do we now need to stipulate and tell state agencies you're obliged to free up that land?
This report is about accelerating delivery of all things that lead to housing. And it's about implementing government policy on housing and on economic issues. Yes, on economic issues, because we're committed to ensuring that we remain, that our economy continues to thrive and to grow, and we retain the ability to provide jobs and homes for people. And we're doing both of those in parallel. And this report will allow us to ensure that...
And this report actually highlights that a lot of the problems relate to the public sector.
And we're taking an absolute sledgehammer to it, and we're going to
because the world only started on November 28th.
I think this is the issue.
This government is pretty much 90% the same as the previous government, and it's pretty much about 70%.
It's exactly the same as the last government, bar a few Greens, add a few independents. But I think the issue, I was going to say COVID,
I was going to say the war in Ukraine, I was going to say the significant lockdown.
The real issue here is the government and the Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael backbenchers, ministers, they all know it, and I'm sure they're saying it to you as well, Fionn. They all realise that if they don't get housing sorted this time around, they're in big trouble and they are gone from the next government, because they went into the election last year making all sorts of promises about housing, giving all sorts of figures about how many houses will be completed, and then not actually hitting those targets. And that is why you are seeing a renewed emphasis on things like infrastructure, on things like housing, because they realise that they're in big trouble and that their time is up if they don't do this now. But they've had...
I think that's an unfair characterisation.
Well,
I think it's really disingenuous to poo-poo 2 years of a lockdown and a global COVID crisis that the last government had to deal with, and the war in Ukraine and the impact on inflation and the cost of living. So it's unfair to say that we didn't care about it in the last government.
I'm not saying you didn't care about it.
She didn't actually say you didn't care.
That's how it's been characterised.
Well, no, it's not been characterised that way. Well, that's your characterisation.
Michael
O'Flynn, can I bring you in there? You must be delighted to hear that there'll be an entire pillar on public acceptance. The state will provide better information to support a more informed debate, but without improved public acceptance, critical infrastructure will be subject to delays involving broader society being worse off. So basically, they're going to tell the NIMBYs who are objecting to stuff that this is in their interest to go ahead, even if it is happening in their backyard. That's great, isn't it?
I must say, I read that and I said good luck to that, because it's a really, really difficult situation. You have a cohort of people there that, and I'm surprised with some of the people who are already lining up to find what's wrong with this, but you have a cohort of people who will not accept development, having the benefit of being in a development themselves. And you have a lot of people from other parts of the country objecting. And these are issues that are now being dealt with. So I would have to say, public acceptance, there has to be a change of mindset in relation to development, infrastructure and housing and otherwise, because we will not succeed from an economic or social point of view if we don't deal with housing and with infrastructure. They're both intrinsically linked and they're both have to be dealt with. But the public acceptance bit is on all of us to educate those who don't want to know, and to try and get more and more people on board, because people will still have the right for a judicial review. Like, people are going to exaggerate the position being taken here. They will still have the right, but you can't have what has been happening in recent years, and it has been happening. Whatever Orla and people in that group would say, people are using environmental. They're putting in, to avoid the legal expenses, they're putting in issues that can be taken to Europe.
Okay, Michael, Michael, let's let Orla speak.
The development sector have been fighting the planning system since it came in 1963. And the tension there is between property rights and land ownership and profit on land and the public good and the cost to the public, because the social and environmental costs and the infrastructure cost of land development all falls on the rest of us. And therefore there has to be a system to balance rights in all of that. What we haven't mentioned this evening is climate, and it's very little of it in the report altogether. And we've seen, you talk about public transport being part of this infrastructure plan, but just last week public transport plans were long fingered and roads are being brought to the fore again. And we're moving. If it is about data centres, it's into fossil fuels. We had liquefied natural gas being mentioned today as part of this plan. And we have the data centres internationally looking for nuclear on their sites.
So that's a
bigger picture.
Is this another way, go back to the original question, of limiting the public ability to object to projects like that? An LNG, a data centre, whatever the case may be.
Certainly not. There will be no limit to access to justice. That's certainly not the case, but it will deal with, it'll tighten the rules around judicial reviews and people who can apply for it. To take up Orla's point on climate and our carbon reduction targets, it's all related. It's absolutely all related. I mean, when you think about the Dublin Bus Connects, project which we're trying to get over the line. The minister they've 12 of those new routes were announced, and 7 of them have been judicially reviewed. 2 are underway. One, the contract was signed last week and the works commenced. The other will commence in 2026. But 7 out of 12 routes have been challenged. And that has a knock-on impact on the number of people who can choose, who can opt to travel on public transport and who can get off the M50 and get into public transport. I would disagree with Orla fundamentally on her assertion or characterisation that we've moved away from commitments to the environment. Last week, the Minister O'Brien announced 12 billion funding for public transport projects, and that's a significant investment by any measure.
There was a fair amount of roads announced as well, in all fairness.
Also necessary.
Okay.